The narrative opens with a fairy tale titled The Adventures of the Brave Knight, Stern. The story tells of how the kingdom's princess vanished one day without leaving a single trace. Consequently, the knight Stern, who harbored a deep love for her, set out on an endless journey in search of her. The scene then shifts to another character, a child named Damien Stern, who wonders to himself why his mother chose this specific surname from that particular tale. The setting changes to settle in the temporary barracks of the Republic of Estarica, stationed at the western front of the Savol's Empire within the Kingdom of Rebi. Second Lieutenant Damien Stern is called upon by a superior officer, and he responds to the command immediately. Damien stands before his commander, who sternly interrogates him regarding his understanding of the importance of the military operation he conducted. The commander continues his questioning, emphasizing that the operation was so dangerous that his life was not guaranteed and that the command's orders were of equal importance, a fact which Damien acknowledges. The commander's anger flares at Damien's composure. He strikes his desk, reprimanding him for acting solo and causing chaos despite knowing all the risks. He then asks him incredulously why he acted as if he did not fear death, to which Damien coolly replies that what he did was simply the most efficient option from his perspective. Damien proceeds to explain his logic, clarifying that creating a breakthrough in the heart of the enemy lines would have opened a gap for their forces to attack, and that moving alone would attract less attention, asserting that he was the only one in his unit with the skill necessary to accomplish the mission. The commander objects to this justification, reminding Damien of his responsibility as a platoon leader and questioning the fate of his soldiers. Had he been killed, only for Damien to respond that it wouldn't matter even if he weren't the leader. Damien adds that he only reached his position because his predecessors had fallen in battle, and if he died, someone else would take his place. The commander sighs in despair, realizing Damien hasn't grasped the essence of his words. The commander softens his tone, expressing concern about what he would say to Damien's uncle if he continued this way. But Damien replies that Marquis Jeska would be the happiest person to receive news of his death, leaving the commander speechless. The commander's inner thoughts reveal that Damien volunteered for a foreign war to escape the influence of his uncle, the Marquis, and he marvels at Damien's insistence on death as if he were a moth drawn to a flame. The commander gives up and declares the discussion over, asking Damien to inform him in advance next time before performing any reckless act because his heart can no longer take it. The commander returns to remind him of the purpose of their presence there, which is to help the Kingdom of Rebi gain its independence, then asks him if he truly plans to die in a foreign land without returning to his homeland, Estarica, to which Damien promises to take the matter into consideration. Damien asks if that is all, but the commander remembers there is something else he wants to tell him. The commander presents Damien with a set of sealed letters and asks him to choose one. He explains that the High Command has come up with an interesting idea, arranging pen pals for the soldiers. Damien finds the idea of anonymous letters strange, so the commander explains that the goal is to create a form of emotional connection for the soldiers to boost their morale and improve their psychological stability. He tells him that they sought civilians to participate in this matter and that some letters have already arrived. But Damien responds with subtle irony, saying they don't have the luxury of exchanging letters while fighting for their lives. The commander insists that Damien take a letter, emphasizing that he set some aside specifically for him, and that the decision to reply rests solely with him. The commander uses one final argument, that if he does not reply, the sender will believe he has died in battle, which affects Damien. Finally, Damien relents and takes one of the letters from the desk. Damien dives into memories of the past while bathing, recalling a scene from the orphanage where a nanny was presenting the children to a marquis, pleading with him to look at them closely. In that memory, the marquis appears rejecting the request with indifference, considering it a mere waste of time. But then he points toward Damien as a young child and announces his decision to sponsor him. Damien remembers how Marquis Jeska's choice instilled in him the determination to work hard and become someone the Marquis could not do without. Damien recalls his resolve to live up to the expectations of the Marquis who gave him that opportunity. He turns his thoughts back to the past when he dedicated his time to studying hard, driven by a sincere desire to gain the Marquis' approval and appreciation. He was fully prepared to do his utmost in anything the Marquis requested, even engaging in grueling sword training to fulfill his wishes. However, the price he paid for this effort was heavy and painful, as he suffered from exhaustion and physical pain. The pain was not just physical. He was subjected to bullying and ostracization from his peers who whispered around him, calling him a vile bastard, and spreading rumors about his mother abandoning him and his real father coming back for him. For this reason, upon graduating from the boarding academy, Damien volunteered to participate in the independence war of the Kingdom of Rebi, driven by a simple hope that the Marquis' influence would not reach him in a foreign land. But as he sat in one of the camps holding his rifle, His hope vanished when someone approached him and called his name. That person was Paul Jessica, who introduced himself and told him he had heard about him from his uncle, the Marquis. Paul extended his hand for a handshake, announcing that he would assist him from now on, which confirmed to Damien that his attempt to escape had failed. At that moment, Damien realized he was still a prisoner in Marquis Jessica's grip, despite his intense desire to be free from that family and its influence. As his recollection of those painful memories ended, Damien emerged from the water, realizing he was still under that man's influence. After finishing his bath, Damien dressed and sat on his bed, holding the letter he had been given. He looked at the letter with boredom, wondering why he was given something that would inevitably annoy him, then proceeded to open it reluctantly. As soon as he opened the envelope, a faint scent of flowers wafted out, making him realize with surprise that the sender must be a woman. He began reading the first lines, which carried a friendly greeting to a soldier whose name and face she did not know, expressing her happiness that fate had brought them together this way. The writer of the letter explained that she was a daughter of a modest family living in a countryside of breathtaking nature, and humbly admitted that she was not a prominent figure and had nothing to boast about. Damien received these words with sarcasm, assuming she was of the nobility, and this conclusion immediately led him to think of the Marquis, sparking his suspicions toward her. He considered it a mere way for an arrogant noble lady to pass her spare time, so he crumpled the letter slightly in his hands. Despite his reaction, the writer had expressed her understanding of the goal of these correspondences to boost soldiers' morale, but she sincerely wondered about her ability to be a true source of comfort to them. Then she honestly admitted that she lacked confidence in her ability to do so, but expressed her hope to receive a reply from him if he were willing to exchange letters. She emphasized that she would not be resentful if he chose not to reply, but at the same time, she wouldn't be able to stop worrying about him, so she begged him to send at least a short response. The letter writer continued her plea, asking for even a very simple reply. She concluded her letter with a prayer for his safety and dated it July 3, 1878, according to the Catal calendar, noting that she wrote it while watching the swans playing on the surface of the lake. She revealed her name in the signature, Lintré. Damien was moved by the letter as he read the name. A slight smile formed on his face, and he decided he would send a reply at least, justifying to himself that he had nothing better to do. As he sat down to write the response, another thought occurred to him. He did not want to disappoint someone, an echo of his old feelings, but in a completely different context. The scene shifts to the quiet rural village of Edenvallen in the west. There, a hand opens a red mailbox to find a letter inside, and joy overwhelms the owner of the hand, who did not expect a reply to arrive. It is the blonde young woman, Lintré, who held the letter with her heart pounding from excitement. She pressed the reply to her chest, wondering eagerly what the soldier might have written to her. In her home, she opened the letter to read the greeting addressed to her, where the writer greeted her as My Lady Lintré, expressing his gratitude to her for her letter and affirming that knowing her was an honor for him. Lintré continues up the stairs while reading the soldier's letter, which he begins, after the initial greeting, with a sincere apology. He expresses his regret in his letter that she received a message from a boring person like him, admitting that he does not possess enough eloquence and does not yet know what to write about himself, so he found no escape but to talk about the weather, even if it was cliché. A man who seems to be her father calls out to her, asking her not to rush and to mind the stairs, so she apologizes with a broad smile, justifying that she was in a hurry. She continues reading his letter, in which he hopes she understands that his difficulty lies not in the reply itself, but in his lack of skill in conversation, while she is overwhelmed with happiness because she finally received a response to her letter. She enters a room while still reading as the soldier explains in his letter that the kingdom of Rebi is located north of Esterica, and thus the winds there are already cold even though it is July. He then wonders about the state of their homeland, Esterica, expecting that the summer heat has reached its peak there now. He reveals in his lines that when he was in Estarica, he could not stand the heat, but perhaps the short, warm season in Rebi is what now makes him yearn for the warmth of that place. He admits that he tried to clearly recall the image of summer in his homeland, but all that comes to mind is that stifling air. Although it has only been a year and a half since his departure, his memories of that place have already begun to fade. He concludes his letter by asking her to beware of falling ill due to the summer heat, dating it July 14, 1978, with the signature 2nd Lieutenant Micard from the gloomy barracks. She notices in the margin that he clarifies the name Micard is a pseudonym, explaining that his real name is not Pleasant, and hoping she understands why he used an alternative name. Lintré wonders at his use of a pseudonym and questions if he hates his real name, but she thinks that he has his own reasons, just like her, and decides not to be overly curious, noting that his style seems dry, but his tone is very polite. Although it is naive to judge him from a single letter, she feels he is a kind person and hopes they become good friends. To make that happen, she wants to be a source of strength for him, even in a small way. She sits on her bed, puzzled about what she should write in her next letter. Then her face suddenly brightens after finding the right idea. She stands by the window and decides she will tell him about the breathtaking scenery in Edenvalen. This is so he can feel the atmosphere of his homeland through her letters. Lintre begins her new letter with a greeting to the lieutenant, considering it a great honor that their paths crossed against all odds. She describes the clear weather of her day and that she is writing to him from a field where cosmos flowers are blooming profusely. She wonders what kind of plants bloom in the cold-winded Rebbe and how they differ from Esterica, also expressing her curiosity to know the nature of the sun there. She adds that starting a conversation with the weather is a lovely thing because it reveals a little about one's personality. Then she admits that if she were to be more greedy, she feels curious about his story. She asks him what kind of person he is, what he likes, what he does during his day, and other similar things, then asks him in return if there is anything he would like to know about her. She promises him that she will answer everything he asks to the best of her ability. In the conclusion of her letter, she thanks him for his warm concern and affirms she will also beware of the heat. She wishes him good health and success in battle. She signs with her name, Lintre. Damien reads the letter, and when he reaches the part where she expresses her curiosity about him, signs of confusion appear on his face. He wonders to himself what things he is supposed to write about her. Damien sits at his desk deep in thought, admitting to himself that he has no other topics to write about in his letter, while his roommate lies in the top bunk absorbed in reading with a sly smile. Damien calls out to his comrade, Sergeant Tennant, who looks up from his book and answers him. Damien asks him if he knows what one should write in an ordinary welcoming letter, so Tennant is surprised by this sudden question about letter writing. Damien explains to him that he has gotten a pen pal, so Tennant jumps from his bed realizing Damien is talking about the new program for soldiers. Tennant expresses his jealousy that Damien's correspondence partner is a lady, revealing that he had applied for the program as well, but his request was rejected, to which Damien replies that he never said the other party was a woman. Tennant mocks Damien's response, asserting that given his personality, if the sender were a man, the letter would have been thrown in the trash without any reply. Damien seems extremely surprised, wondering why his reputation is that bad. Then he asks Tennant if he is hinting that he only cares about women. Tennant answers that it's not quite like that, explaining that although Damien exhausts them at work, he is known for his kindness toward the weak and women. He concludes from this that Damien's worry about the greeting in the letter must mean the sender is a woman, and that he couldn't ignore her out of politeness, making Damien wonder if he really acts that way. Tennant confirms this is a fact anyone could notice, and Damien, who thought he treated everyone fairly, seems annoyed. Tennant advises him to write simply and without affectation, because trying to be formal will make him more boring, then gives him an important piece of advice: never to make any promises about what he will do after the war ends, which piqued Damien's curiosity to know why. Tennant explains theatrically that in novels, characters who make such promises, like someone promising his sweetheart to marry her after the war, are usually the first to die. He adds with disgust that a man like that is the worst of all. Damien looks at him coldly and tells him he shouldn't have asked him in the first place. Tennant puts his hand on Damien's shoulder, explaining he was joking, but his tone soon turns serious. He tells him that based on the current atmosphere, it seems they will soon move from the rear lines to the battlefront. Damien's features darken, realizing the fact that this place is a battlefield. Images of the harsh war manifest in his thoughts, where people are killed by shells nearby. He imagines how a field of cosmos flowers could be distorted in a moment by falling bombs. From his window, he sees a scene where gunpowder smoke fills the sky. He runs his hand through his hair in despair, realizing he cannot write about such things in a letter. His thoughts reveal the psychological impact of war. The longer one remains on the battlefield, the more one gradually begins to lose their mind. However, in the midst of this despair, he looks at the glimmer of light from the window, remembering that somewhere out there, ordinary people live their daily lives in peace. The image of the girl described by the letter passes through his mind, sitting in a green field under a blue sky contemplating cosmos flowers. He finally decides it's not bad to enjoy this kind of peace, even if only through letters, and leans his head on his desk, exhausted. Damien's letter reaches Lintre, where he begins by saying that after reading her question, he spent a long time thinking about what he should write. In another scene, Lintre takes off her shoes and prepares to enter a stream, while a young man who is with her tries to dissuade her, asking why she insists on going herself to pick some flowers after he offered to help. Lintre politely refuses his offer, affirming she will go herself because the water is not deep. The young man warns her that the bottom is slippery and she might fall, so she thanks him for his concern but insists on proceeding, explaining that she wants to send those flowers as a gift. Lintre explains that she believed the gift would be more meaningful if she picked it herself. In his letter, Damien replies to her question about what he likes, saying there is nothing in particular and that the daily life of a soldier on the battlefield is not a story suited for a lady. Instead, he decides to ask her the same questions. What does she like? And how does she spend her days? Explaining that he might draw inspiration for his answer from her response. As Lintre walks in the water, the echo of his letter's words resonates in her mind, alongside the warnings of her companion, Glenn, who calls her from afar to urge her to be careful not to fall. Lintray smiles and tells Glenn that he is as worried as her father, reassuring him that the water is very shallow and nothing to worry about. But as she was walking, her foot suddenly tripped. She fell into the water with a large splash, and Glenn's voice rose reprimanding her because he had warned her beforehand. Lintray sits in the water completely wet, and Glenn asks her anxiously if she is okay. But instead of being in pain, she bursts into laughter while Glenn rushes towards her. While laughing, she remembers Damien's carefully written words, wondering about the topics that might interest her. She thinks with gentle irony about his roundabout way of asking questions, but decides she will answer his questions with pleasure, in appreciation of his sincere effort in thinking of topics that interest her. Lintray begins her letter by noting that she resides in the countryside of Aidenvallen, as shown by the sender's address, and that she moved there last year after living in another city. She expresses her admiration for this small, quiet village, noting that perhaps because its people adhere to old traditions, they hold great respect for nobles, even if they are nobles in name only like her. She reveals that what worries her most recently is that she hasn't been able to form any real friendships yet, but she gratefully adds that the village mayor's son, a friend named Glenn, takes her on tours of the area from time to time. She describes him as being around her age and seems considerate of her feelings, but she regrets that her stamina is weak, preventing her from wandering for long periods. As for her family, she mentions she lives with her father and one maid and that her mother died when she was young. Then she asks Damien a direct question, asking about his family members. Damien reads the question while on his way to a mission, and pauses at her question about whether he is married. His face darkens at the mention of the word family. Of all topics, this was the one he hated most. Damien thinks to himself that since they are just pen pals and will never meet, perhaps it's better to make up some story. But he realizes that avoiding talking about family might pique her curiosity even more. As he holds the letter, dried flower petals fall from it, and he reads the margin Lintray wrote, explaining that these petals are from flowers she picked yesterday from the valley. She hopes this small gift will bring him something of the summer of their homeland. Damien continues reading while in a military vehicle, answering her question that he is not married, and that the age of 20 is still a bit early for marriage. But he adds in a sad tone that he has no other family. He apologizes because this topic is not pleasant for him, so he prefers not to talk about it, and for this reason, his answer will be brief. However, he assures her that he is not foolish enough to leave behind a precious family and volunteer to throw himself into the furnace of death. Then he changes the course of conversation, asking her about her age. Finally, he concludes his letter by thanking her for her kind gesture in sending him the summer of his homeland. Damien's letter reaches Lintray, who reads it thoughtfully. Lintray puts the letter in a decorated box, thinking that his tone may seem dry, but she feels a hidden warmth lying between his lines. She is greatly surprised when she realizes he is only 20 years old, meaning he is 1 year younger than her, as she had imagined a lieutenant in the army would be older. This discovery piqued her curiosity, making her wonder about the kind of story he hides behind him. Meanwhile, Damien and his comrades arrive at a new camp, where their commander tells them they will be stationed there for several weeks to train Rebbe forces. He orders them to ensure all supplies and equipment are properly prepared during that period. As Damien stands guard on a cold night, he thinks about his commander's words that they will soon move to the front lines. Damien reads Lintray's new letter, which she begins by addressing him, describing him as the lieutenant who only seems mysterious regarding his age. She tells him she was wondering what he might ask, imagining all sorts of possible answers. She adds that she felt a bit disappointed because he only asked one question, but she answers it saying she is 21 years old, 1 year older than him. She admits in her letter that she was truly surprised by his age, as she did not expect him to be a lieutenant at such a young age, even if he had just graduated from officer school. She describes him as truly amazing for being younger than her, while Damien thinks that the age difference between them is only 1 year. Lintray apologizes in her letter for bringing up the subject of his family, admitting she was careless, and that everyone has circumstances they do not wish to talk about. She explains that seeing his way of thinking about his family piqued her curiosity, while affirming he can ignore the question if he doesn't want to answer. Then she asked him directly about his reason for joining the war, and about the motive that makes him continue fighting despite his description of it as hell. Damien reads these words with emotion, wondering why she is curious about his motives for fighting. While he is lost in thought, a smiling soldier from the Rabi army approaches him and asks if he is from the volunteer Esterica army. Damien confirms this, wondering to himself why a Rabi soldier is here, and asks if he wants something. The soldier hesitates a bit, then suddenly performs a military salute, announcing he would like to offer him thanks on behalf of Rabi. Damien is confused by this sudden act and wonders if he should return the salute. The soldier laughs and apologizes, admitting he might have startled him. He adds that he knows it might seem strange, but he really wanted to thank him. The soldier explains that while he is fighting for his homeland, the Astarica soldiers have no real connection to this war. Despite that, they have provided them with support, and he feels deep gratitude toward them. He affirms that were it not for their comrades from Esterica, they would not have held out so long, thanking them for helping Rebby. Damien asks him about his age, and the soldier enthusiastically answers that he is 19. He explains that he volunteered for the Independence Army as soon as he became an adult, so Damien thinks this young man resembles him in this regard. Damien introduces himself by his pseudonym, Lieutenant Micard, to introduce himself properly as well. He puts his hand on his chest, declaring he is fighting for the freedom of Rebby. The other soldier repeats his words with full enthusiasm. The young soldier asks permission to leave, and after his departure, Sergeant Tennant, Damien's comrade, approaches to ask if this young man came to him as well. His comrade describes him as a unique young man, for it is rare to see someone like him on the battlefield, so Damien simply comments, "He is young." He inquired from his comrade Tennant about the young soldier's age, and Damien replied that the boy's age does not exceed 19 years. His comrade comments that the age difference between him and the young soldier is only 1 year. Then he adds jokingly that both Damien and the soldier are younger than him. These thoughts bring Damien back to Lintray's letter and her pivotal question about his reason for fighting, so he reflects on the fact that this war does not concern him directly. Rather, it is a conflict between two foreign countries. He continues thinking that those who fight such wars usually have a higher motive, while others are sent by high command orders only, which makes him understand why she is curious to know his real motive. He compares himself to that young soldier who fights for what he must protect, while he, in contrast, wishes for nothing but to be touched by a stray bullet. Then he wonders bitterly if he truly possesses a noble cause that justifies him killing enemies, only to answer himself with a categorical no. He reaches a conviction that someone like him, who doesn't know what he wants or how he should live, has no role but to fight and bleed instead of those who deserve life. The youth fighting on the front are their country's future, and their survival means that future will be brighter. Suddenly, the calm atmosphere turns upside down as sirens blare, announcing an imminent air raid on the front trench line. In the midst of the chaos, while the soldiers take their positions and a signal flare is fired, Damien's thoughts return again to the letter he is writing to Lady Lintray, explaining the reason for his promotion despite his young age. As bullets rain around him, he completes the answer in his mind that the heavy loss of life created vacancies in the upper ranks, so he was promoted, quickly to find himself wearing the lieutenant's insignia. He affirms that it was not due to exceptional talent, while the brutality of the scene is embodied in one of his comrades falling wounded beside him. He continues answering her question in his heart, admitting he has no real connection to the Kingdom of Rebby and was not originally a professional soldier. Despite his belief in Rebby's right to independence, this was not the motive behind his joining the war. He sees that the reasons for war seem complex from afar, but in reality, it is just a bloody struggle between two parties. As for the real beneficiaries of this tragedy, they are those who manage the conflict from their safe places, like players moving chess pieces without any danger reaching them. Events return to the burning battlefield, where voices rise calling for transport teams to evacuate the wounded. The young soldier appears sitting on the ground, wounded and in pain. The soldier realizes a shrapnel has lodged in his lower back and he needs immediate treatment, so he tries to stand up, but Damien rushes to him and supports him before he falls. Despite the soldier's attempt to push him away to help others, Damien insists on supporting him, warning him of the necessity of applying pressure to the wound correctly. Damien warns him that he has lost a lot of blood and will die if he doesn't receive treatment, and his usual thoughts about not knowing what he wants or how to live echo in his mind. As he supports him to help him walk, he tells him to rest and lean on him, thinking that even in this hell, there are people struggling for justice and humanity. He believes those who carry great causes must survive this place, so the future of this country becomes better. For this reason, he fights instead of them. That is all there is to it. Then the scene returns to Damien penning the last lines of his letter, asking Lintray not to think deeply about this war or the fighting. He asks her not to occupy her mind with such matters. He wishes for her to remain in her safe haven and live in peace. In her room at night, Lintray finds herself unable to sleep after reading his letter, so she decides to write him a reply. She rereads his last words in which he admits he has no message to leave behind and doesn't know how he's supposed to live, and therefore he fights instead. A deep look of concern and emotion appears on her face. Lintray thinks deeply about Damien's words and finds that his condition is very sad, as he doesn't know what he wants, nor even how he should live. Despite this despair, he fights to protect others, which she sees as amazing resolve and admirable persistence. She wonders to herself about the kind of harsh days he must have endured to reach this state of thinking. As she rereads his letter, she turns to the margin where he explains the reason for his question about her age, noting her mention of a young man named Glenn she has been spending some time with recently. In his letter, he warns her against associating with men who are 21 years old, while simultaneously apologizing for interfering in her affairs or speaking ill of her friend, whom he does not personally know. But he insists on his opinion, affirming by virtue of being the same age that a young man who has just reached adulthood is the most foolish creature on the face of the earth. Lintrey is surprised by this unexpected warning. She is surprised by the existence of a whole extra page in the letter and wonders if its writer is truly 1 year younger than her. Then a smile forms on her face, considering that after the serious beginning of his letter, he has revealed an eccentric side to his personality. But she soon returns to serious thought, wondering if this long talk about fleeting matters is his way to avoid delving into the heavy and painful topics he referred to earlier. She concludes that all he expects from her is simple news and stories about a quiet, ordinary life. After all, they are just pen pals. Based on that, she decides to play along with his style and sits down to begin writing her reply. The scene shifts to Damien in a medical clinic, where the doctor tells him his treatment is complete, and that fortunately his external injuries are not serious, expecting him to heal completely within a few weeks. Damien asks him about the condition of the soldier he brought from the Rebi army, so the doctor reassures him the young man is also fine. He explains that the young soldier has a strong will and is recovering quickly, and that he will heal completely with rehabilitation. Damien feels relieved to hear that. After the doctor leaves, Damien sighs while sitting on his bed. His eyes fall on a letter placed on the table beside him, so he picks it up to discover it is a reply from Lintrey. He begins reading, where Lintrey starts her letter describing his advice regarding Glenn as a new perspective, admitting she partially agrees with him that men at this age can indeed be fools. But she expresses her surprise at his intense interest in her social relationships, as she thought he was indifferent to her personal affairs, while Damien thinks to himself that he should have told her to cut her relationship with him completely. Convinced that the young man must have hidden motives toward her, he assures himself that men do not dedicate their time to a woman they do not care about. Lintrey continues in her letter, affirming she is not mocking him, but found his warning unexpected and amusing, and tells him that spending time with Glenn made her long for female friends, as there are matters one simply cannot discuss with a male friend. But she adds that perhaps because they do not speak face to face, she finds herself able to open her heart to him sincerely, even if he isn't a female friend, which gives her a great sense of comfort. Damien smiles a slight smile. Then she changes the subject with enthusiasm to tell him that her dog, Timo, gave birth to 5 puppies that day. A scene appears of Lintrey looking happily at the puppies, explaining in her letter that her dog is 1 year old. She describes the puppies as not having opened their eyes yet, and that they are very wonderful creatures. She adds playfully that they will become more beautiful over time. Then at the end of the letter, she asks him if he prefers dogs or cats. She declares she is a dog lover, and insists that he tell her his preference in his next reply. Damien smiles to himself as he reads, realizing he had a feeling she liked dogs. Damien feels relieved. He was worried his last letter would be heavy for her, but she didn't mention anything about it. He thinks that he admires this lightness she possesses. As he presses the letter to his chest, he feels that her words create a connection between him and the precious details of ordinary life that he misses. Damien begins his new letter expressing his relief to hear that she finds in his letters comfort similar to what she might find with a female friend. But he notes that he has no friends of his own gender, let alone the other gender, which makes him worried about his inability to understand her feelings and empathize with her fully. While he is so, his train of thought is interrupted by the barking of a dog he turns to with a slight smile. He asks her in his letter not to ask him about the reason for his loneliness, explaining that it happened simply without him realizing, while a black and white dog trots toward him, wagging its tail happily. The dog approaches him with pleading looks as if asking him to pet it, so Damien pauses for a moment. He answers her question finally, admitting that like her, he prefers dogs over cats, and extends his hands to pet the dog, which seems happy with that. He explains that dogs give him a sense of connection and understanding, unlike cats whose thoughts he cannot understand, adding that they raise military dogs in the camp, which makes him more accustomed to their company. In the midst of these thoughts, 2 soldiers pass by him and perform a military salute, so he responds with a simple nod. Then he returns in his letter to offer her advice, asking her if she owns a camera and strongly recommending she take pictures of the puppies every day, justifying that the childhood stage in animals passes in the blink of an eye. A warm smile covers his face as he adds that documenting those moments will make them precious memories in the future. However, this calm did not last long, as his commander summons him to inform him of new orders stating their repositioning to the rear barracks within a few days. The commander explains they will pass through a mountain garrison and orders him to ensure march preparations are complete, which Damien confirms. Damien sets off with his unit on a long march through the forest, and the weather has become so cold that soldiers wear their thick coats. Damien thinks of their suffering last winter due to supply shortages and strongly hopes the situation will be better this year. Damien announces they will camp in that place for the night, and that their movement will be easier the next day after they meet transport trucks at the specified point. Damien encourages his men to hold on a little longer, while his thoughts return again to Lintrey, wishing in his heart that she takes care of herself so she doesn't catch a cold this autumn. At night, Damien sits alone on his guard shift and feels the cold creeping into him. His comrade Tennant approaches him and asks why he is still awake. He adds that the time for changing guard has not come yet. His comrade advises him to sleep as much as he can because he is still young, and Damien remains silent. but Damien replies playfully, asking him to sleep as well and stop complaining of fatigue during the day, so Tennant denies this claim. As they sit around the fire, Tennant begins grumbling about having to withdraw again after all the suffering they went through, wondering why this always happens at the decisive moments. Damien comments calmly, assuming some mistake occurred somewhere. Tennant changes the conversation to ask Damien why he joined the army in the first place. Tennant explains he is the eldest son of a large family and had to work as a mercenary to support them, but notes that Damien seems of a more refined appearance than that. Then he teases him, wondering if he is a secret son of one of the nobles. So annoyance appears on Damien, who replies sharply that he grew up in an orphanage. Damien notes it's the first time he hears Tennant has younger siblings, so Tennant answers briefly. Then he adds in a sad tone that they are no longer by his side now. Tennant tries to lighten the atmosphere, saying jokingly that this place has become like home to him, then wonders sincerely about the use of being attached to a place full of people who can die at any moment. Damien realizes in himself that he now understands the reason for Tennant's maturity, which exceeds his age. For behind this calm lies a painful story. To change the subject completely, Tennant suddenly remembers to ask him about the news of his pen pal he has been writing to recently. Tennant notes that 3 months have passed since Damien began exchanging letters, and that replies, reach him regularly, so he asks him jokingly if love has begun to bloom between them through letters, which Damien denies with disdain, considering it mere nonsense. He affirms that it doesn't exceed an exchange of pleasantries, and that neither holds such an interest for the other. But Tennant doubts that, believing there is another reason, and wonders why he continues writing if he isn't interested, especially since other soldiers stopped replying after a few letters. He adds stronger evidence, which is that he made sure to take the letters with him to the front lines. He admits he didn't expect all this care from him for a pen pal. Damien answers after a moment of silence that he didn't want to disappoint her expectations, for he imagines she must be waiting for his letter, and that if she doesn't receive a reply, she will believe he has been killed in battle. He explains he doesn't mind if she loses interest and stops writing, but he doesn't want to leave her thinking he has died. Tennant listens to him thoughtfully. Then Tennant changes his tone, expressing his true confusion. He doesn't really understand the reason for someone like him being in a place like this. He explains he doesn't see him fit to be a professional soldier, especially with his personality, which he describes as kind. Damien's features darken, and he answers in a desperate tone that he never planned to leave the army. Suddenly, their talk is interrupted by the appearance of enemy soldiers in the dark, so Damien shouts, warning his comrade to get down. He moves quickly to take a position for fighting and returns fire. One of the enemy soldiers falls wounded. It soon becomes clear they have fallen into an ambush as more enemies appear and launch an attack on them. Chaos escalates with the exchange of fire, and soldiers' shouts demanding combat positions and cover. Damien manages to assess the situation quickly, realizing enemies are advancing from all sides, but fortunately their numbers are not large, and what happened was just an overlap in their paths that led to this surprise attack. He concludes both parties must have almost exhausted their ammunition now, but amidst these thoughts, the fierce fighting continues. Lives fall around him, and he wonders if they will be able to hold out. In the heat of his preoccupation with fighting, someone shouts, warning him. He is surprised by an enemy soldier attacking him from behind with a knife, realizing they managed to flank them. At a decisive moment, Tennant intervenes to receive the stab instead of Damien, and blood flows on Damien's face, who looks in shock. Damien eliminates the attacker before Tennant falls affected by his injury. Damien rushes toward his comrade, shouting his name, begging him to stay with him. Tennant looks at him with straying eyes and utters his last words in a faint voice, admitting he is afraid. Then he breathes his last in Damien's arms, who holds him shouting his name in despair and pain. The scene shifts to after the battle, where surviving forces reach the truck rendezvous point, and a commander issues an order for each platoon to provide a report on its status. Damien steps forward to present his report to his superior, the major, who notes his joining. With a featureless face and extinguished eyes, he informs him that the 3rd platoon was subjected to a surprise attack by the enemy. He concludes his tragic report stating that most of the platoon members were killed in battle and only 6 soldiers survived, so the commander looks in shock at the small remaining group. Damien and the rest of the survivors travel in a military truck, as he reflects on the fact that the death of comrades on the battlefield is nothing new. However, he realizes that for the sake of the survivors, he must maintain his composure. Yet the memory of Tennant does not leave him. In his room at the barracks, he lies on his bed sighing, remembering how Tennant used to tease him whenever he saw him reading the letters. The echoes of his late comrade's words resonate in his mind, asking him if he was reading the letters again, and that at this rate, he would memorize their contents by heart. Damien sinks into his grief, bitterly wondering why Tennant had to die to save him, even though he had never asked him to do so. In the height of his despair, he addresses Lintre in his imagination, asking her why she only sent it her first letter and never did so again. Then he leans over in pain, wishing she would send her next letter. After a few days at the Esterica barracks, Damien is summoned to his commander's office, who informs him that his platoon will be reinforced with new recruits. The commander expresses his regret for the loss of his men, but urges him to take care of the new soldiers. Damien assures him that he will do so. The commander calls him again by his name, reminding him of the difficulty of the situation and the necessity of caring for the survivors. He emphasizes the importance of his steadfastness given the critical situation on the front lines. He asks him if he understands what he means. Damien reassures him not to worry, affirming that he is fine. As he leaves, Damien tells the commander that such events are common occurrences on battlefields. He sits alone outside and pulls 2 letters he received from his pocket. He reflects that the number of letters has become 2 now. He recalls how, on the day he lost his men, he returned to the barracks and wrote a letter to Lintre in a state of panic, asking her to send her letter. He marvels at himself for how he wrote such nonsense and actually sent it. He admits he has no idea why he did that, then begins to open one of the letters. In her letter, Lintre seems worried, addressing him as being unlike his usual self. She explains she was surprised by the arrival of a separate letter from him, and asks if something bad happened or if he was harmed. It turns out she sent her reply via express mail, as she appears handing the letter to the courier, asking him to deliver it as quickly as possible. She adds in her letter that his message reached her via express mail, and in a state that caused her concern. As for the perfume, she admitted she simply forgot about it, but she promises him that she will make sure to send her letters from now on if it makes him happy, telling him she always worries about him since he is on the battlefield. She asks him to take care of himself and to tell her immediately if anything happens. She tells him she sent something with the letter, and Damien discovers it is a handkerchief embroidered with his pseudonym, Micard. He lifts the handkerchief to his face, inhaling a warm and fragrant scent from it. Damien feels sorry for causing her worry, then sets the letter aside. He picks up the other letter, wondering if it is the reply to his previous message. In it, she addresses him as the always wise lieutenant and refers to his idea of photographing the puppies, admitting she hadn't thought of it before. Lintre responds enthusiastically to the lieutenant's suggestion, deciding immediately that she will take as many pictures as possible to document the beauty of the puppies. While she is thinking about it, another idea occurs to her. She asks in her letter if he would mind if she attached a personal photo of herself with the puppies' photos. Then she sits at her desk to write, sincerely admitting she feels very curious about his appearance and wonders if he too feels curious about her. But she quickly reconsiders, realizing that since he uses a pseudonym, it is unlikely he would reveal his face. She expresses her regret, but affirms she will understand. Despite that, she repeats her wish for him to send a photo, expressing her overwhelming happiness at being his pen pal. Lintre explains that his letters have expanded her world. As someone who rarely leaves her village, she considers this correspondence with someone in a distant land to be a precious gift. For this reason, she begs him to share what he knows and to describe the world as he sees it through his eyes, for she longs to know that world she is ignorant of. Damien contemplates her words deeply, and the phrase, "the world through my eyes," echoes in his mind. Immediately, his memory takes him back to the horrific scene of his comrade Tennant breathing his last in his arms, admitting his fear of death. Damien wonders to himself if she truly needs to know such harsh facts. Some things in this world are better left kept secret. He prefers that she stays away from this horrific reality and knows nothing about it. For this reason, he decides to refuse her request to send a personal photo, believing that keeping a photo would create an unnecessary kind of attachment. As a man who might perish at any moment, he does not want to involve her in these kinds of deep emotions. However, he cannot stop himself from thinking about Lady Lintre. He imagines her as a vibrant and cheerful woman, a year older than him, living in the small and beautiful village of Edenvallen. He smiles to himself, realizing the absurdity of it, as only a few months have passed since they began exchanging letters. Nevertheless, he sincerely wonders if he has already begun to feel the desire to rely on her. He finally decides to send her a reply. He begins his letter by describing himself as a desperate fool, so miserable that he is unable to find the right words. He reminds her of what he said earlier about men his age being fools, and for this reason, he sent that strange letter, while he is shown giving orders to his soldiers to prepare. He reassures her that he was not suffering from any physical injury, but rather it was just a psychological crisis, and that he has recovered from it now and is perfectly fine. Then the scene shifts to Damien inspecting the new recruits, noticing they still lack experience and maturity. He introduces himself to them officially as Second Lieutenant Damien, commander of the 3rd Platoon, declaring they are under his full responsibility from that moment onward. However, he clarifies one thing to them from the start, confronting them with the harsh truth that some of them will survive, but not all. War is a reality, and no matter how much responsibility he carries, those destined to die will die, and he cannot protect every single one of them. Nevertheless, he gives them a firm promise that he will lead them until the end, and as long as he is alive, he will never leave a soldier alone on the battlefield. Then he orders them to prepare and follow him, and the new soldiers set off behind him with enthusiasm. With this, the barracks that were quiet return to buzzing with life and sounds again. The places that became empty after the departure of former comrades are filled. In his room, Damien writes a letter thanking Lady Lintre, assuring her that he received the handkerchief she sent safely. Damien admits in his letter that he does not know much about perfumes, yet he liked the scent. Then he decides he will not actually use the handkerchief for fear that its scent will fade, but intends to keep it as a precious treasure. He continues his talk reminding her of her promise that she would send him a photo if he asked for it. But with the coming of night and the lights being turned off, Damien lies in his bed and reaches a decisive resolution that he does not wish to see her face. He clarifies to himself that his decision does not stem from hatred for her. On the contrary, he worries she might become too attached to him, especially since, unlike her, he is just a soldier who might die at any moment. He believes that keeping a photo of someone like him will bring no good, and that he never wishes to see her waiting endlessly for a letter from a man who has already died in battle. For this reason, he apologizes deeply that he will not be able to send his photo either. At the moment, he prefers to settle for just exchanging simple daily stories with her, but he leaves the door of hope slightly ajar, wondering if she will reveal her face to him on that day when he might find his way to her and return safely. The scene shifts to Lintre reading his reply. She mockingly calls him Prince Micard, king of all desperate fools. She wonders angrily at his logic, asking where he got such a foolish saying that keeping a photo of someone who might die will bring no good. Lintre explains that her mother died when she was a child, and all that remained of her were some belongings and photos. She looks at those photos now to remember her, asserting that without them, she would feel her mother's face fading from her memory, and her grief would have been heavier. She adds that forgetting someone might ease the pain, but feeling forgotten is more painful than anything else, and that it is too late for him to ask her not to be attached to him. She admits she couldn't sleep worrying about him after his last letter, and assures him that if he dies in battle, she will truly be sad and will cry bitterly. So if he doesn't want to see her like that, he must not die. She threatens him that if she hears him say something ridiculous like that again about being a man who will die, she will jump on the first train bound for Raby. She asserts she would do so just to see his stupid face with her own eyes. She clarifies to him that precisely because he is in a war where he might die any day, she wants to talk to him more while he is still alive. She wishes to make the best possible use of the time granted to them. In a concluding note, she tells him that since she cannot force someone who doesn't want to exchange photos, she will send him photos of her dog, Timo, and the puppies instead. She jokingly hopes their cuteness contributes to softening his harsh soul even just a little. A slight smile appears on Damien's face as he thinks that at this rate, he might be killed by Lady Lintre's pen before he is killed by a bullet. He realizes that for the first time in his life, as someone with no family or friends, he finally has someone who will cry for him. He should be happy about that, but he feels something else. He wonders to himself why his heart feels so heavy just thinking about her tears. He keeps wondering why, my Lady Lintre. In another scene, the platoon photographer orders Damien's platoon to line up and stay still in preparation for a photo. Damien explains it is their first group photo since the platoon's formation was changed. In the army, group photos of units are taken regularly for tracking and record-keeping purposes. He reflects that the people who were in the last photo are gone, and unfamiliar faces have now replaced them in those empty spots. One of the soldiers teases his comrade, asking why he looks unusually elegant, and the other replies that he took care of his appearance because he will send the photo to his fiancée. As Damien listens to their talk, he touches his military uniform and thinks it is inevitable to get used to these new faces now. The photographer finishes the countdown, and the camera captures the group photo of the platoon in a sudden flash. While that moment is preserved in a photograph, Lintre's words from her previous letter echo in Damien's mind, expressing her extreme curiosity about his appearance and wondering if he too feels curious about her. The scene returns to Damien sitting in his room, holding a blank piece of paper, thinking that her request for a photo was troubling him, but he decides that what he will do now will be enough. He begins writing a letter to Lady Lintre, starting by offering his apology and admitting he never expected her to be so upset by his foolish complaint. Despite his apology, he insists that the fears he expressed in his previous letter are realistic and logical concerns. Then he adds that he hopes she realizes that as much as she worries about him, he too worries about her. He tells her he doesn't know if just making an effort is enough, but as she requested, he will do his best not to die in battle, then begs her not to take the train to Raby. In a final note, he tells her that thanks to her for the cute photo of the puppies, he is attaching his own photo, and he places the group photo of his platoon inside the envelope. In her home, Lintre opens the letter to read it, mockingly addressing him as the vile, trivial Lieutenant Micard, and describes his sending of a group photo as a very deceptive act. She tells him she will accept his apology, but warns him to always remember she is ready to buy a ticket to Raby at any moment. Since things have come this far, she will try to find him in the photo, guessing he might be the first person from the right in the second row. Damien reads her reply in which she confirms the person she guessed seems closest to the image she formed of him through his letters, and signs with her name, Lintre, confident in her conclusions. Damien puts the letter in his pocket, thinking ironically that of all people, she chose Sergeant Colt, who looks exactly the opposite of him in appearance. A cynical smile forms on his face, commenting to himself that for someone claiming brilliance in deduction, she has no talent for it at all. Suddenly, he notices his soldiers standing before him, wondering why they are there. The soldiers express their surprise, saying it is the first time they have seen him smile, as they are used to his expressionless face, and they wonder with great curiosity who he receives letters from. The smile immediately vanishes from Damien's face, and he coldly asks them when he was smiling, but one of them insists he was smiling moments ago like a fool, with a look more tender than the one he gives his wife, and they complain that he never shows them this side. Damien denies the matter completely, asserting that it didn't happen. The soldiers begin whispering among themselves, speculating she must be his sweetheart, or at least someone he likes. And Damien hears them thinking he can hear everything they say. He expresses his annoyance at their reaction, explaining that it is nothing more than a pen pal program run by the army. The soldiers are even more surprised, wondering why he still participates in this program. One of them comments that it's the first time something foolish from the high command actually succeeded, talking about love that blooms through letters. But Damien interrupts him, affirming she is not his sweetheart. One of the female soldiers ignores his denial, insisting he at least likes her. Damien falls silent, unable to respond, and the female soldier adds that no one spends all this time with someone they don't care about. She urges him to stop denying and give the matter a chance, and Damien huffs with boredom. The soldiers decide to withdraw before being accused of insubordination, and they leave teasing each other. Alone, Damien puts his hand on his chest, wondering if this feeling is truly possible. He wonders to himself if it's possible to fall in love with someone whose name or face he doesn't even know, but he quickly denies the matter to himself, convincing himself that it's just that they need a pretext to pass the time. Damien continues convincing himself that once she gets busy with her life, she will most likely forget about the letters completely. He persists in these thoughts while lying in bed, expecting she won't continue communicating with an anonymous stranger like him, especially if she gets married or something of the sort happens. Then he tries to calm himself down, suggesting that what he feels is most likely pure imagination. But soon he is haunted by the memory of Lintray's words in one of her letters, in which she promises to take good care of him if he visits her at her home one day, and asks him to look forward to that. Her words echo in his mind as she suggests instead that she come to him, asserting she won't need more than a word from him to buy a ticket to Rebbe immediately. Then he remembers her signature in which she expressed her longing for that day when she would be able to meet him. Damien feels annoyed and curses inwardly because he cannot stop thinking about it. He realizes to himself that this situation is not good at all. In a new letter that reaches him with the onset of winter, Lintray addresses him as her always kind lieutenant, telling him this will be the last letter she sends before the end of the year, then expresses her concern for not receiving any reply from him for a while. She advises him not to forget to send her his New Year greetings, then asks him about his plans for next year. While he dips his hand in a treatment bowl, he thinks of her question and her reminder to him of what she heard, that Astarika soldiers are entitled to be discharged from service after 2 years if they choose. She asks him in her letter if he too is about to complete his 2 years of service. The medic finishes his treatment and advises him not to try using his hand that day, warning him that he might lose his finger if he isn't careful, and asks him to keep the glove on it. Damien feels intense pain, thinking that things on the battlefield never go as planned. He asks the medic if they have any painkillers, only to get the reply that there is only morphine for critical cases, and its stock has also begun to run out. The medic compares the situation to last year, when supplies were steady, but now they can no longer rely on that. Damien falls silent, and his eyes fall on the letter placed over his clothes. In it, Lintray directly asks him if he does not intend to be discharged from service. Damien goes out to walk alone in the snow, realizing that their second winter in Ribi was harsher than the previous one. Damien sighs, thinking that the front lines are still in a state of tense stalemate, and that the High Command believes the war might end quickly depending on which side the scale tips. As a result, conditions on the front deteriorate day by day, and here he is now entering his 3rd year on the battlefield. He threw himself into this hell without any goal, assuming death was just a matter of time, but unexpectedly, he is still breathing until now. For someone like him, who had no dreams or desires, he has found one thing he wishes for now. Damien finds his platoon members gathered around a burning barrel for warmth. He asks them what they are all doing there, and one of them welcomes him, noting that the cold inside is no less harsh than outside. One of the female soldiers invites him to come closer and warm himself, then asks about his hand, and he replies that he is managing. Another soldier asks anxiously if it is frostbite again. Then the soldier puts a cover around him and asks him to take good care of himself, for they don't want a platoon without a leader. A slight smile forms on Damien's face as he thanks them for their concern. To himself, he finally realizes what he wishes for: to see the end of this war in their company. Damien's curiosity begins to stir to know what lies beyond the end of this war, while he realizes that days have passed since the last time he replied to Lady Lintray's letter. Despite knowing she waits for his reply, he cannot force himself to pick up the pen and write. Her last words echo in his mind, in which she wasn't asking him to flee the war. Cowardly. Rather, she only wished for him to know she worries about his safety more than anyone else, and she wants him to be in a safe place. He hasn't forgotten how she reminded him of his promise to come see her one day, but he realized too late that Lady Lintre spends her days in worry because of him. He feels sorry because he cannot fulfill even one of her wishes, describing himself as a total fool for uttering such nonsense about going to meet her. Damien thinks that if he had the slightest intention of making this battlefield his grave, he should never have uttered those words, even as a joke. Then he decides to burn the letters, apologizing to himself to Lady Lintre, wishing that the time they shared together would be completely erased from her memory, as if it never happened at all so that she doesn't wait for him for a single moment anymore. As he throws the letters into the fire, he prays in secret that she forgets everything and lives happily in a field where flowers bloom. The scene shifts to Damien standing in his commander's office, asking sharply if they will execute the operation plan as it is. He tells the commander that he will not lead his men into a death trap and that he is requesting reinforcements. But the superior commander tells him for the 1,000th time that there are no reinforcements that can be sent, so Damien shouts that this operation is ridiculous. He explains the current plan differs completely from the initial assessment, and that the major told him it was just a diversionary operation, but the current situation uses his platoon as bait while the main force attacks from the rear. Damien affirms they suffer from a severe shortage of personnel, and if they advance, it will be a certain massacre, and that he cannot ask his men to trust him and follow him on a suicide mission. The commander tries to calm him down, explaining he only asked them to hold on until reaching the safe zone, and that a small unit is perfectly capable of doing that. He adds that the essence of the operation is to surround the enemy from both sides and eliminate them with an airstrike, and the plan is perfectly feasible if executed correctly, and that tactical decisions have already been made by the High Command, and the operation will proceed as scheduled. The commander concludes his talk affirming there will be no changes. Then he asks him to leave if he has finished speaking. Damien hits the desk, wondering why his platoon specifically, for he doesn't believe it is particularly suited for this mission, and that there are many other platoons. He wonders if they were chosen specifically because he is the one leading it. The commander asks him what he is hinting at, and Damien replies that if asked about the most suitable victim in this unit, he would be the ideal candidate in the commander's eyes. He adds ironically that Marquis Jeska will be happy with his death, and that after he survived stubbornly for 2 years, the Marquis must be fuming with rage now. The commander rises from his seat and shouts the name Damien, but Damien continues speaking loudly, explaining that with such a reckless operation, even if he dies, no one will have to bear the blame. The commander grabs his collar and shouts at him to shut up, threatening him that he might be executed for insubordination here instead of the battlefield. Damien replies coolly for him to kill him if he wants. He affirms that if his death were the price to save his platoon, he would face execution 1,000 times with pleasure. The commander softens his grip and explains to Damien that he chose his platoon for this operation because he trusts his abilities. He adds that the operation has already been confirmed by senior officers, and if someone must go, it must be the unit with the highest chance of survival. And he decided that Damien's leadership provides the best mobility and adaptability. The commander concludes his talk affirming this is the only reason for choosing him, and there is no other reason. But Damien clenches his hand tightly, declaring explicitly that he does not trust him. He continues his confrontation, explaining that despite the commander acting outwardly kind and calling him cousin, in the end, he is a member of the Jeska family. Therefore, he only sees in him eyes for the Marquis watching him closely. The commander's face darkens with anger at these accusations, and he slaps Damien's face hard, telling him he will not tolerate such insulting suspicions. He tells him in a definitive tone that whatever he says, there will be no reinforcements, and orders him back to his position, affirming that this is a military order that is final. The scene shifts to the battlefield, where Damien's platoon sets off through a dense forest amidst gunfire. Damien orders his soldiers to reach the specified point and deploy smoke bombs. After deploying the smoke, Damien asks one of his soldiers to provide him with a report on the situation. The soldier informs him there is 1 missing and 4 dead, and despite no serious injuries, 6 soldiers have become unable to fight, leaving only 18 soldiers able to move forward. Damien contemplates the situation, seeing that losses are less than expected, and thinks that despite all the fuss he made with his commander Paul, the damage is still minor, and they will be able to eliminate the enemy if the aerial bombardment arrives on time. Accordingly, he decides to proceed with the plan and orders the transmitter to be connected to communicate with command. Damien's platoon communicates with the main force asking for a reply, and a voice from the other end asks if Damien is the one on the line. Damien replies in the affirmative, so he recognizes Major Jeska's voice and informs him they have entered the safe zone and are waiting for the scheduled bombardment. But he is surprised by the Major's angry voice ordering him to withdraw from his position immediately. The Major informs him via the device that there will be no aerial bombardment, and that the operation has completely collapsed as no bombers are available to be sent to their location, leaving Damien in a state of shock and wondering what they are supposed to do. The Major apologizes to Lieutenant Micard, explaining they have no other options, and there is no proper way to save them. He suggests he try to join the main force himself to withdraw, then wishes him good luck before the connection is cut. Damien falls to the ground in a state of shock, remembering how they had requested reinforcements repeatedly to no avail. The soldiers gather around him in a state of panic, wondering about the meaning of what happened, what they should do, and whether the main force has indeed abandoned them. In the midst of their confusion, questions begin about how to get out of this predicament, whether they should head toward the river as a priority to escape the valley. Whispers spread among the soldiers as some express despair over the lack of bombardment, while others suggest that crossing the fast river without weapons is impossible, and crossing the valley would expose them to the enemy. Despite their fear of death, some still trust their commander will find a way out. One of the female soldiers cuts through the chaos with a loud shout, ordering everyone to be quiet and wait for orders. One of the soldiers asks the lieutenant if he has a plan, and Damien answers, putting his hand on his head in despair, admitting he has plans, but they are all fraught with risk, and none of them will be able to save everyone. But he continues with a firm look, affirming this does not mean there is no way to save some of them. Damien orders everyone to gather and announces his decision to withdraw north. He explains the plan to them, which is that the north connects to the forest, which will provide them with cover for withdrawal if they hold out a little, and orders them to deploy what remains of the smoke bombs to the north, then run in the opposite direction while the smoke is behind their backs. He expects the enemy will chase the smoke, believing they are trying to escape under its cover. While the enemy is busy with the smoke, he orders them to continue running until they can join the main force safely. One of the soldiers notices a weak point in the plan, which is that the smoke will not last long, and that someone must stay behind to continue releasing it. So he asks who will take the task of igniting the smoke in the south. With a look full of sacrifice, Damien announces he is the one who will take on that task. While his soldiers were withdrawing, Damien looked from behind the curtain of trees, believing the distance separating them from the enemy was now sufficient. Then he estimated that the smoke bombs they had, which were more than he expected, would be enough to buy more time, and informed his soldiers that he would take on the role of bait, ordering them to run at full speed. His decision was met with shock and refusal by his soldiers, who protested that if they fled, he would not be able to catch up with them, and wondered anxiously what he would do alone. Damien acknowledged the validity of their fears, but justified his position that no one else was more suitable than him to play the role of bait. Then he reminded them that he is responsible for this platoon, and it is his duty to ensure they all withdraw safely. He tried to reassure them that he understood their concern, but he might be able to manage if he were alone, adding with bitter irony that he is luckier with misfortunes than they think. Despite that, the soldiers insisted that what he was doing was not right. Rather, it was certain suicide even for him. So Damien interrupted them with a firm tone, ordering them to prepare to move immediately if they were to execute the plan. One of the soldiers stepped forward, trying to volunteer to take his place, but Damien silenced him with a strike of his rifle on the ground. Then he sternly reminded them that according to military law, the platoon commander has full authority to execute immediate punishment in case of insubordination during a military operation. He ended the argument with a direct threat, ordering them to stop arguing and execute what he said, or he would make an example of the rebellious soldier for the rest, leaving them no choice but to comply. After their departure, Damien realized the enemy must have discovered by now that he was the bait. Nevertheless, he had to continue buying more time for them, so he set off firing. In the heat of the engagement, a bullet hit him, upon which he let out a pained cry. As he stumbled, questions passed through his mind about how many times he had recklessly thrown himself before death. He realized it was a true miracle that he had survived all this time with all his limbs. Despite his injury, he forced himself to continue running, driven by his desire to hold on a little longer for his men. But this time, he felt a different sensation, and that his end had already come. He surrendered to this certainty as he fell to the ground, believing he would truly die this time. In his final moments, he found some solace in the idea that his life alone, if it would save his men, might be enough. He had always considered the battlefield a pit for death, so dying in it is not strange. He assured himself that he wasn't clinging to life. Rather, all he wanted was to give them more time. Then sensation began to fade from his hands, and he realized calmly that this is how one dies. At that moment, enemy soldiers spotted him, noted he was the bait, and issued an order to eliminate him with a hand grenade, then pursue the others. While death was imminent, a sudden thought occurred to his mind that amazed him in such a situation. It was a voice he hadn't heard before. He immediately remembered Lintray's words in one of her letters, when she told him she would truly be sad and would cry bitterly if he died in battle, and begged him to return to meet her safely. Only then did he wish with all his heart if he could go to meet her. For the first time, as he extended his hand toward the sky, he felt he did not want to die. But it was too late, as the grenade exploded near him with a massive bang. Then the scene shifts to a quiet place, where Damien stands in civilian clothes before a rural house, carrying a bouquet of pink flowers, and sighs deeply. Damien knocks on the door of a rural house carrying a bouquet of flowers, and a voice from inside tells him to wait for a moment. As soon as the door opens, Lady Lintrey appears, eagerly calling him by his military pseudonym. But the scene fades, for reality returns to Damien as he wakes up in a hospital bed, his eyes holding a weak look and his body covered in bandages. The doctor tells him he was lucky, as some refugees fleeing from a village were the ones who found him and transported him to the hospital. The doctor continues his explanation, clarifying that his condition was critical due to the shrapnel that hit him from the grenade, and that they had to remove a quarter of his liver, in addition to needing surgical stitches, in several places, asserting that rest is his top priority now. Then the doctor touches upon his right arm, explaining they did their best to save it, but the damage was so severe they couldn't. Damien sits in his bed silent, contemplating his injured body, while the doctor adds that merely surviving this accident means he has exhausted the luck of his entire life. Damien thinks ironically of the word lucky. After a grenade exploded directly in front of him, he only lost one arm, making him believe he came out a winner from this deal. The matter becomes more bitter when he remembers he uses his right hand, wishing he had lost his left arm instead. His thinking is interrupted by Major Jeska entering the room calling his name, so Damien recognizes him immediately. The Major approaches him with a worried look on his face, but Damien smiles coolly, considering the loss of his arm a small price he paid for his life. With a cynical smile, Damien asks the Major to come closer, expressing his desire to calm down by punching his annoying face. The Major comments that he hasn't changed at all, but agrees to his request jokingly, telling him he will allow him to hit him as much as he wants. Then he tells him what happened, explaining that the enemy must have anticipated their operation and shelled the runway first, and that the survival and regrouping of his platoon was a miracle in itself. Then he asks him if he has any idea of the misery his men lived through in his absence, describing how he faced great difficulty calming them while they were crying and begging to form a search party to find him. He adds that he has just told them he has woken up and they are most likely crying with joy now. Damien feels relieved because everyone is fine. Major Jeska looks at Damien's amputated arm, and Damien tells him he won't be able to carry a weapon for a while. He affirms that his return to the unit seems unlikely. After a moment of silence, the Major tells Damien he officially authorizes him to be discharged from service. The matter ends with the scene in which the Major stamps the document for the honorable discharge of Damien Stern from military service. After a while, as Damien prepares to leave, he is surprised by the Major's voice calling him from afar. The Major catches up with him panting, expressing his happiness because he almost missed him. He reproaches him for thinking of leaving by just leaving a note, and that he almost let him go without even seeing his face. Damien replies that he knows he is a busy person, but the Major insists the matter concerns his discharge, and if he let him go like that, he wouldn't know when he might see him again. The Major extends his hand to shake his, congratulating him on his discharge. Then he asks that they meet in Esterica after the war ends. Damien calls him Major, then admits he is a real scoundrel. Then he extends his hand to shake his, admitting that among all the scoundrels he knows, the Major seems the most noble. The Major smiles and bids him farewell, affirming he will see him in Esterica after the war. Damien asks permission to leave, saying he must depart now, and the Major agrees while a steam train passes in the background. But the Major stops him before his departure, telling him he has something he wants to give him. Then he extends his hand, presenting him with a card bearing an address for someone named Asher Ulan, and explains this man is the best prosthetic limb maker he knows. The Major admits the prosthetic will not be like a real arm, but he heard mechanical limbs these days are good enough to practice daily life, and asks him to mention his name to receive the best care. Damien expresses his gratitude and thanks him for his help. While they are standing, the Major asks him if there is anything he would like to do now that he has been discharged from service. Damien contemplates the question, and Lintrey's words in one of her letters immediately echo in his mind, in which she begged him to return to meet her safely. He answers the Major that there is someone he promised to meet, admitting that at that time he thought it was a promise he wouldn't be able to fulfill, and considers himself to have been a fool. The memory of that critical moment on the battlefield passes through his mind when Lintrey's request occurred to him, and he felt for a moment he didn't want to die. He realizes that promise is what gave him the strength to hold out until the end. With a look full of determination, he tells the Major that now he must go to meet that person, setting off on his journey on the train. The train reaches its destination, and the station announces arrival at the village of Edenvallen. Damien gets off the train carrying his bag and takes a deep breath. He inspects the place around him, realizing to himself that the village is indeed small and modest, just as he heard about it. As he walks through its streets, he thinks that this is the place where Lady Lintrey lives, and wonders if she will be able to recognize him. Doubts haunt him about whether she will welcome him, especially since it has been a long time since the last time he sent a reply. Then he looks at the place of his amputated arm under his coat, confused about what he should say regarding it, but he makes up his mind, deciding he will settle for seeing her face and ensuring she is fine. As he continues walking, he decides he must first find a means of transport. Damien spots a man standing with a horse-drawn carriage, so he approaches him and asks if he is working. The man replies in the affirmative, and asks him to climb into the back. Damien climbs into the carriage, and as they set off, the driver notices his arm and guesses to himself that he might be a discharged soldier. As the carriage advances on a rural road, the driver thinks that a handsome young man like him doesn't seem suited for this quiet village. The driver asks Damien about his destination, and Damien asks him to take him to house number 14 on Philbos Street. The driver is surprised by his request and asks him the reason for going there. Damien answers simply that he is going to see a friend. The driver turns to him with a face bearing bad news and tells him no one lives there now. He explains that a large fire broke out in the house not long ago, and the place burned down completely, leaving Damien in a state of shock. Damien asks him, stuttering, about the meaning of his words, and the driver replies that he doesn't know any friend he means, but the master of the house and one of the maids died in the fire, and the daughter was seriously injured and moved to the capital's hospital. Damien refuses to believe what he hears, so the driver notices his reaction and realizes he didn't know the news, adding that the accident occurred only about 3 weeks ago. Damien approaches the driver with great concern and asks him about Lady Lintrey and the severity of her injury. The driver is surprised by his mention of this name. Then he explains a shocking truth to him, that Lintrey was not the master's daughter but was his maid, leaving Damien in a state of total bewilderment. The driver corrects Damien's misunderstanding, explaining that if he meant by that name the maid of that house, she had died. These words fall like a thunderbolt upon Damien, whose eyes widen in horror and shock. Damien collapses in the carriage from the weight of the news, clutching his head in despair and wondering about the reality of what is happening. The driver tells him that he does not know all the details, but there must have been a misunderstanding. He then clarifies that 3 people resided in that house: the owner, Baron Lloyd Benbrick, his daughter, Sarah Benbrick, and a maid named Lintrey, who possessed only her first name. He adds that it was Lady Sarah who was moved to the capital's hospital after the fire, while the other 2 lost their lives. Damien tries to process this conflicting information, murmuring the names Sarah and the maid Lintrey as he attempts to organize his thoughts. A bitter struggle rages in Damien's mind. He realizes that the Lady Lintrey he corresponded with had lied to him, but he does not know her true identity. He wonders about the reason for this deception. If the maid was the one who wrote the letters, why did she impersonate a life that did not belong to her? And if Lady Sarah was the true writer, why did she borrow her maid's name? Damien feels that everything has collapsed into a state of utter chaos. The driver suggests he turn back because nothing remains in that place, but Damien insists on going there, driven by his need to see it with his own eyes. Upon their arrival, the driver announces their destination, and Damien finds himself before the charred skeleton of a large house consumed by flames. He gets down from the carriage and steps heavily toward the ruins, signs of shock and disbelief evident on his face. He wonders to himself how something like this could happen. He stands before what remains of the building, realizing the magnitude of the massive fire that left nothing but the house's outer frame. The driver explains that the house was isolated, which delayed the villagers' discovery of the fire until it was too late. Damien contemplates the wreckage, assuming everything inside has burned completely and not a trace remains. The driver notices his state and asks anxiously if he is okay. Damien tries to gather the fragments of his thoughts and decides he must meet Lady Sarah, reasoning that she is likely the Lady Lintrey he knows. He believes it would be difficult to fabricate everything mentioned in those letters, yet the driver's words about the maid's death still ring in his head, so he refuses to believe them, assuring himself she cannot be dead. Damien turns toward the driver and asks if he knows the name of the hospital to which Lady Sarah was moved, but the driver has no answer. Meanwhile, he hears a rustling sound coming from the nearby bushes. Damien alerts immediately, sensing someone hiding there. With his military intuition, he links the presence of an intruder at an isolated fire site to the possibility of them being the arsonist. Without hesitation, he springs toward the source of the sound and pins the hidden person to the ground, who screams in pain. Damien holds the person down, sharply asking for their identity and their relationship to the homeowner. The young man groans in pain and asks to be released. The driver rushes toward them, calling the young man by the name Glenn, questioning his presence here. Damien freezes for a moment. He knows this name well from Lintrey's letters and realizes he is Lady Lintrey's friend. Damien moves away and pushes Glenn's hand back, who shouts at him angrily, asking who he is. Glenn sits on the ground, still trembling, rebuking Damien for his reckless behavior and attacking him in this manner. Damien calmly asks if his name is Glenn, as Lady Lintrey had mentioned this name repeatedly in her letters. Glenn is surprised by this question and asks if he is a friend of Lady Sarah, which confirms to Damien that he is the same young man Sarah used to spend her time with. Glenn's suspicion grows, asking Damien how he knew him and how he knew of his close relationship with Sarah. Damien feels relieved, concluding that Lady Sarah was indeed the one impersonating Lintrey. Damien interrogates Glenn about his suspicious behavior and hiding in the shadows. Glenn justifies his position by saying he had just heard the news of the fire and came to check, but he felt wary when he saw a stranger at the ruins of the house. Damien wonders how he only heard the news now despite 3 weeks having passed since the accident. Glenn explains he was traveling for work and was only recently able to get leave to visit the village, but Glenn quickly flares up in anger, questioning why he has to provide all these justifications, asserting that Damien is the most suspicious person there. Glenn turns to the driver, Carl, questioning why he brought a stranger to this place, so the driver explains he only brought him because he claimed to know the family that resided here. Damien tries to de-escalate the situation, clearing his throat and introducing himself as a friend of Lady Sierra. Glenn is surprised by this, so Damien explains that he came in person to check on her after she stopped replying to his letters, only to discover the tragic fire upon his arrival. Damien apologizes to Glenn for his previous rudeness, admitting he thought for a moment he might be involved in the fire. Then he asks him eagerly about Lady Sarah's condition, affirming that the family who lived here were dear friends of his. Glenn falls silent for moments, while Damien expresses his sincere desire to find his friend. Glenn extends his hand, admitting he doesn't know the details either, but his parents might know more since his father is the village mayor. Glenn hesitates at first, explaining that he isn't supposed to discuss village affairs with strangers. But he admits he feels equally frustrated and invites him to go to his house for the time being. Glenn bids farewell to the driver Carl, then sets off with Damien to his house. As soon as Glenn enters his house announcing his return, Damien follows him carrying his bag. A small, two-toned, white and brown dog greets them, barking happily. Glenn tries to calm the dog, calling it Maple. Damien contemplates the dog, feeling that its markings seem strangely familiar. Immediately, he remembers the photo Lady Lintry sent him and realizes this dog's markings perfectly match those of one of the puppies in that photo. Damien feels sorrow, realizing that the photo was likely lost in the fire as well. He grips the handle of his bag, wishing he had kept the photo she sent him. Damien asks Glenn if this dog belongs to Lady Sierra. Glenn replies that Maple is one of the puppies of their dog Timo, and they had adopted her. Glenn is now certain that Damien is indeed a friend of Sarah's, admitting he had doubted him at first. Glenn's mother appears carrying bread and asks her son if he brought a guest. Glenn tells her his guest is a friend of Sarah's with some questions. Damien steps forward and introduces himself officially as Damien Stern. Damien explains to Glenn's mother that he came to visit an acquaintance at the Benbrick house, only to be surprised that it had been consumed in a fire, then begs her to tell him what happened. Glenn's mother sits at a wooden table and begins recounting the events, explaining that a massive fire broke out suddenly, leaving them all deeply shocked. As everyone sits around the table, she adds she doesn't know all the details, but Lady Sarah, who survived the incident, was in critical condition due to smoke inhalation. She continues that they felt the local hospital's capabilities were insufficient to treat her, so she was recently moved to a hospital in the capital. Damien asks her if she knows which hospital she was moved to. Glenn's mother admits she isn't quite sure as the transfer happened suddenly. She explains that since her husband is the village mayor, their family was responsible for Sarah's care, but they received a call from the hospital last week telling them that Sarah's guardian had arrived and moved her to Nihiro Hospital in the capital. Damien asks about this guardian's identity, wondering if Sarah had any other relatives besides her father. Glenn's mother replies that the hospital did not disclose any information, but they approved the transfer, making them assume everything was fine. She tells Damien that the whole matter is strange, especially since they didn't mention the guardian's name or title. Damien politely asks to use their phone to call the hospital where Sarah was staying. Indeed, Damien calls Nelson General Hospital and inquires about a patient named Sarah Benbrick, who was with them until recently. He explains to the hospital clerk that he heard of her transfer to one of the capital's hospitals and asks if they can tell him her new destination. But he is met with a refusal, as the clerk tells him hospital policy prohibits disclosing patients' personal information. Damien insists on his request, explaining he is a friend of Lady Sarah. He continues his persistence, begging them to tell him only the name of the new hospital. However, the clerk cuts him off, affirming that Miss Benbrick's guardian specifically requested not to share any information regarding her with anyone else, and based on this request, they cannot tell him anything. She apologizes, explaining there are no exceptions to this rule. Damien grips the phone receiver tightly in his hand, feeling extreme frustration. After the call ends, Damien collapses on the floor, placing his head on his hands and sighing in despair. He reflects that ultimately, he was unable to learn anything except that she is in some hospital in the capital. While sitting on the floor in a state of grief, the dog, Maple, approaches and licks his hand in an attempt to comfort him. Damien contemplates his situation, thinking she must have had a good reason for hiding her real name. He reaches the conviction that her true identity, whether she was Lintry or Sarah, no longer matters now. All he wishes is for her to still be alive. Damien stands up ready to leave and apologizes to Glenn and his mother for the disturbance he caused. But Glenn's mother reassures him it doesn't warrant an apology and wishes him luck in finding his friend. Glenn offers to accompany Damien on his way to the station. As they walk through the village lanes, Glenn paces ahead of Damien with indifference. Damien stops Glenn and tells him there is something he needs to confess. He admits to him that in truth he does not know Lady Sarah's appearance and asks him to describe her. Glenn is surprised and wonders how he claims to be her friend while not knowing her. Damien insists that their friendship is not a lie, despite the doubts etched on Glenn's face. Then he reveals the truth, explaining he was her pen pal. Glenn's eyes widen in surprise, realizing Damien is the letter friend Sarah used to talk about. Damien asks if she had mentioned him before. Glenn smiles, expressing his amazement that Damien is the person Sarah was constantly receiving letters from. He assures him she spoke of him more than he could count, describing how she would contemplate his letters with eyes full of happiness. Damien envisions an image of Sarah sitting in a flowering garden, cradling his letters and saying he is her dear friend. But this happy image soon fades as Glenn continues speaking in a hesitant voice about her sad looks whenever she read his letters. Glenn stops talking suddenly, placing his hand over his mouth trying to remember Sarah's appearance. Damien is angered by this behavior, reminding him that Lady Sarah might now be between life and death and that it's no time for jokes. But Glenn swears he isn't doing it on purpose. Rather, he truly cannot remember her face. Damien is stunned by this strange confession. Glenn falls into a state of panic, realizing he cannot remember Sarah's face, nor even her father, the Baron's face, or the maid Lintray's. He admits to Damien that he cannot remember anything related to their appearances. He begins to wonder anxiously if he has developed dementia or lost his mind from overwork. But suddenly an idea strikes him, and he suggests they ask the villagers, for they must remember, and he dashes off asking Damien to follow him. They approach a woman from the village and ask about the Baron's family, but she admits she wasn't close to them and had only just heard of the fire from the mayor. The woman adds that the features of the Baron and his daughter don't stay in her memory. They didn't appear much even before the fire. Then they speak to another man, who also confirms he doesn't know the appearance of that family's members, blaming Glenn, noting he was supposed to know them well since he was always near their property. Glenn stands helpless while Damien's confusion grows. Glenn sits on the ground in a state of despair, expressing the strangeness of the situation. He asks sarcastically if the villagers have been struck by a collective amnesia. Damien realizes something is indeed wrong. It is inconceivable that an entire village would forget the faces of a family that lived among them. Even Glenn, who is close to Lady Lintray, has forgotten her. Threads intertwine in Damien's mind. He links the sudden fire that perished the Benbrick family with the collective amnesia that struck the villagers. He concludes that everything happening is shrouded in mystery. Glenn sits beside him and asks what he will do now. Damien replies in a tone full of determination that he will go to the capital, Nihiro. He affirms he will search every hospital there until he finds Lady Sarah. Glenn dismisses this plan, reminding Damien of the massive number of hospitals in the capital and the difficulty of finding one person in them. Then he asks if he knows anything else about her besides her name. Damien replies that the same applies to him as well. He blames him, asking how he claims to be her friend while he cannot even remember her face. Damien admits to himself that Glenn is right, trying to find someone in the capital's numerous hospitals knowing only their name is a plan approaching madness. However, an image of Sarah extending her hand to him appears in his imagination, and her words echo in his mind, reminding him of his promise to come see her. Damien clenches his hand tightly, realizing he cannot lose her this way. At that moment, Glenn suddenly jumps up, remembering something important, and announces he has a photo of Sarah. Damien's face brightens. He has finally found a clue leading to her, and feels grateful that Glenn hadn't told him this before. But Glenn quickly recoils with an embarrassed smile, admitting he thinks he has lost the photo. Damien's features darken, which prompts Glenn to apologize immediately. Damien boards the train bound for the capital and sits alone thinking about his futile journey. He pulls a business card from his pocket bearing the name Wayne Glenn from the Loud Trading Company, which Glenn gave him before his departure. Damien remembers how he thanked Glenn for his help, even though he didn't get what he wanted. Damien had asked him to call him if he obtained any new information regarding Lady Sarah, to which Glenn agreed. Then Glenn gave him his card, explaining he hadn't seen the photo since taking it with him to work, but he might find it in his home if he searched well, promising he would tell him as soon as he found it. Glenn admits his first impression of Damien was bad, but he notes he doesn't seem like a bad person and wishes him luck in finding her. Damien remains determined to find her even though everything is still mysterious, praying in his heart that Lady Lintray remains safe. The train reaches its destination at the Nihiro capital station. In a hotel room, Damien wakes up from a horrific nightmare calling out the names of his comrades who fell in battle. He sees in his dream a blonde lady sitting beside him asking him to wake up. He calls her by the name Lady Lintray, and she confirms she is. He wonders if what he sees is real. She asks him with a smile if he missed her. Damien admits he has missed her all this time. He wanted to meet her, to touch her, and to hear her voice. He tells her he has come to meet her for this reason, but this happy dream soon turns into a nightmare as he finds himself surrounded by flames. Lintray shouts at him, asking angrily why he didn't reply to her letters. Damien tries to apologize, affirming he didn't mean to, but his hand touches the fire and burns, and he screams in pain. He continues calling her name Lintray, while seeing her surrounded by flames. Damien wakes from his sleep terrified and gasping, calling the name Lady Lintray. He sits on his bed, feeling a sharp pain in his amputated right arm. He reaches for the table beside him and takes some painkillers. Damien sighs, marveling at the vividness of the dream he had, wondering if she had waited for him even while in the midst of the fire. Then he addresses her in his imagination, affirming he is ready to endure her hatred and anger as in the dream, and all he wishes is for her to appear before him safe. The next day, Damien heads to Nihiro City Center. He enters one of the hospitals where he asks the receptionist if they have a patient named Sarah Benbrick, but the receptionist tells him regretfully that they have no patient by that name in the hospital. Damien accepts the matter with a face full of frustration. He continues his arduous search journey, moving between various hospitals in the capital by tram, but all his attempts fail. Damien stands exhausted at a tram station and sighs in despair, realizing that trying to find her in a vast city like the capital was a crazy idea from the start. While he is lost in his confusion, wondering about his next destination, a small child runs past him calling for his mother to catch up. The mother warns her child to mind his path, but he trips and falls directly in front of Damien, making a slight noise. Damien quickly kneels beside him and gently asks if he is okay. The child replies, rubbing his head, that he wasn't hurt. But as soon as the child looks up, his eyes fall upon the place of Damien's amputated right arm, and he gasps in shock and terror. The child stands up quickly and runs away, shouting to his mother that the man's arm looks strange, leaving Damien kneeling with a look of pain and shock on his face. The mother rebukes her son for his hurtful words, telling him he shouldn't say such things. As Damien moves away, he hears the whispers of the two women wondering pityingly what might have happened to him. Damien grips his amputated arm, realizing he desperately needs a prosthetic as soon as possible. Despite this painful experience, Damien continues his search, entering another hospital with heavy steps. As he walks in the hallway, deciding to end his search for that day and return to his lodgings, a blonde woman wearing a pink dress passes by him. Suddenly, Damien stops in his tracks. He has smelled a very familiar perfume scent. He turns quickly, realizing immediately that this is the scent of Lintray's flowers that he could never mistake. In a flash, he extends his hand toward her, calling her name hesitantly. He grabs her arm, stopping her to ask if she is Lady Lintray. The blonde woman with blue eyes turns toward him, a look of surprise on her face. Damien gazes at her intensely, wondering to himself if she is truly the one he is looking for. The woman asks him in a sharp tone to let go of her arm. She adds that his grip hurts her. Damien withdraws his hand immediately, apologizing in extreme embarrassment for his action. Then he asks her hesitantly if she is Lady Lintray, before correcting his question by asking if she is Sarah, but she strictly and decisively denies it. Damien feels deep embarrassment and apologizes again, explaining he mistook her for someone else, blaming himself in secret for his haste just because of a similar scent. The woman's tone softens when she realizes he didn't mean offense, so she tells him she forgives him. She advises him to be more careful next time, then turns to leave. But Damien calls her again, and apologizing for his disturbance, offers to buy her a drink as compensation for his rude action. The woman looks at him suspiciously, telling him she was already on her way to a cafe, then adds mockingly that if he wants to flirt with a girl, he should follow a better approach, leaving Damien puzzled. Before he can reply, he remembers a scene of a man trying to flirt with a woman using the exact same phrase, which explains her cautious reaction. Damien falls into confusion because of his embarrassment. Damien bitterly praises to himself how he has become like that insolent man who was flirting with the woman, and how he turned into a desperate person with no trick up his sleeve. Damien hastens to deny this accusation with a confused movement of his hands, affirming this wasn't his intention at all. Then he explains to her she can refuse if she feels offended, but she smiles and accepts his offer, clarifying it's just an invitation for a drink, and since she is free anyway, she doesn't mind. But she shows some hesitation, noting she cannot go out in these simple clothes. Without hesitation, Damien takes off his jacket and offers it for her to wear. She looks at him in surprise before he presents the jacket to her completely. She accepts it with a warm smile, expressing her thanks. After she wore his jacket, she seems more confident and comfortable. As they walk together outside the hospital, he suggests heading to a nearby cafe across the way. She agrees immediately, noting she knows the place and its drinks are delicious. As they are on their way, she suggests they introduce themselves since they are meeting face to face. She introduces herself as Liliana Carnell, and Damien replies by revealing his full real name for the first time, Damien Stern. Inside the cafe, Liliana sits contemplating the drink menu with interest. Damien notices she is taking a long time, so he asks if she doesn't find something she likes, offering to go elsewhere. But she apologizes, explaining she was just contemplating the menu. Liliana explains she wants to drink coffee, but worries that caffeine might be harmful to her heart because it makes it beat faster. She adds, she doesn't think a little. Coffee will kill her, but fears her aunt will rebuke her if she knows. However, the cafe owner intervenes in their talk to reassure her, explaining he sees heart patients worrying about this weekly, but there is no problem as long as she doesn't drink massive amounts. Liliana is surprised by this happy news. He adds he didn't invent this talk himself, but asked a doctor in the neighboring hospital, so Liliana feels great relief, expressing how much she missed drinking coffee. Based on that, she enthusiastically orders a cup of cold vanilla latte. As soon as she sips her drink, she feels she has come back to life again, and happiness overwhelms her. She expresses her joy that she is finally tasting this delicious drink once more. Damien asks about her heart condition. She replies that things have gone this way. Damien apologizes if his request caused her disturbance, but she reassures him that it's just sitting and drinking coffee, so there's no problem. Then she reveals to him she was born in good health, but suffered an accident in which she almost lost her life, where her heart stopped 3 times. Since then, her heart has become weak and she is undergoing treatment. Damien listens to her moved. Damien tells her they have a common denominator. He too was born in good health, but suffered an accident that almost claimed his life and left him with permanent consequences. Liliana asks if his amputated arm is a result of that accident that almost killed him. Damien reveals to her that he lost his right arm and a quarter of his liver because a hand grenade exploded directly beneath him. Liliana is shocked, expressing her amazement at his survival from certain death. Liliana comments that the goddess of luck must truly cherish him. Her words stir a painful memory in Damien's mind, and he recalls that moment when he was breathing his last on the battlefield, wondering if his desperate desire for life was what created that miracle and saved him. Damien recalls in his memory the image of Lintre telling him to stay alive and come see her, and feels as if that image and her words are present before him now. He admits to himself that without clinging to the hope of seeing her, he would have surrendered to death at that moment he lost his arm. But now he feels lost because he no longer knows who she truly is. Despite this mystery, he believes Lintre will remain for him the eternal goddess of luck, so he agrees with Liliana, commenting that it indeed seems so. Liliana asks him if he served in the cavalry in Rebbe. Damien wonders in turn if he already looks like a soldier. She replies with a smile that it exceeds appearance. He speaks exactly like soldiers, noting that all his sentences end with formal military suffixes. Damien explains he didn't speak this way before, but believes the reason is his recent discharge from the battlefield and expects to return to his original way of speaking soon. She asks if he was discharged because of his injury, which Damien confirms. He adds he isn't good at doing anything else and was planning to stay as a professional soldier after reaching the rank of second lieutenant, but was discharged in this manner. Liliana is astonished by his rank, noting he seems very young to her, and asks for his age. Damien tells her he is 21 years old. Her astonishment grows, expressing her extreme admiration, as reaching this rank at such an age is amazing, since most academy graduates are in their mid-20s. She adds he is younger than her, and yet is truly impressive. Damien pauses for a moment, realizing this reaction of hers is exactly like what Lady Lintre wrote in one of her letters when she expressed her great surprise at his young age relative to his military rank. He recalls her words, which were exactly identical to what Liliana just said, making him remember that Lintre had mentioned she was 1 year older than him. Based on that, Damien concludes that Miss Carnell must be 22 years old. When he asks her, she confirms this is true, then dismisses his calling her Miss Carnell, explaining she isn't of the nobility, and asks him to call her simply Liliana. She insists on the matter in a pleasant way, emphasizing the pronunciation of her name, syllable by syllable. Damien complies with her request in confusion, calling her Lady Liliana. Then Damien changes the subject to ask her about the perfume she wears. She is a bit surprised by his question. She tells him it's from a cosmetics company named Lati, and asks if its scent is strange, which Damien immediately denies. He explains he had smelled this scent before, which piqued his curiosity. Liliana tells him this perfume enjoys great popularity and is well known among perfume lovers. She describes it as giving a feeling as if one is standing in the middle of a field of flowers, explaining it's the perfume she usually uses when going out, but she has been staying in the hospital for 2 weeks. She continues her talk grumbling that she longs to go out, but doctors tell her her heart hasn't recovered yet, so she cannot leave the hospital or even spend the night out, making her very bored. For this reason, she put on some perfume at least to feel some change. Damien listens to her thinking that her way of speaking is exactly like Lady Lintre's style. He realizes the similarity isn't limited to the general atmosphere. Rather, her phrasing of sentences seems as if copied directly from the letters. His suspicion increases, wondering if she is truly Lintre, and decides to ask her directly. Damien asks Lady Liliana if she knows anyone by the name Lintre. She replies with a strict and decisive denial. Damien is frustrated by her categorical reply, thinking it unlikely she is lying, and reaches a conclusion that if she is truthful, then the Lady Lintre he corresponded with is the liar in this story. Liliana notices his distraction and reminds him that he grabbed her earlier and asked if she was Lintre, guessing the person he searches for must look like her. Damien agrees, but admits he doesn't know her actual appearance. Damien continues his interrogation, asking if she ever lived in the village of Edenvallen, or if she had heard the names of Baron Lloyd Benbrick, Sierra, or Lintre, but she denies knowledge of any of them, even affirming she had never heard of a place by that name. Damien explains to her it's a rural village in the west, so she shows her understanding, noting she only lived in the eastern region, so she doesn't know much about the west. She adds that her only relative she knows is her aunt. Damien accepts this information with a look of disappointment on his face. Damien falls into confusion because of his embarrassment. Liliana comments playfully that if the girl he is searching for looks like her, she must be very beautiful. Damien stutters in his reply. Unable to keep up with her, she rebukes him gently, considering he has no idea how to talk to women and that he should have at least complimented her and said she is beautiful. Damien reluctantly agrees, affirming she is indeed beautiful, but she asks him cleverly if what he said was just a compliment. Damien gets more confused and tries to deny that. She bursts into laughter. Considering him a very fun and cheerful person, she tells him he is truly a fun and amusing person. Damien contemplates her, seeing she is indeed a young lady who laughs a lot. After enjoying their conversation, she tells him she would like to stay longer, but fears her aunt will rebuke her if she is late. She returns his jacket thanking him, and Damien tells her he has enjoyed his time as well, for it has been a long time since he had such fun. Damien asks her if her wrist has improved and apologizes again for his rudeness. She reassures him it's fine, but she warns him in a cute, childish manner not to repeat this action with anyone else in the future. He promises her to take the matter into consideration, and she comments with a smile that he indeed acts like a soldier in his behavior. Then she bids him farewell, suggesting they meet again later. Damien watches her as she leaves, thinking that if he met Lady Lintre in reality, he would feel the meeting would be something like this. But he quickly corrects his thoughts, assuring himself she isn't Lady Lintre. As he walks away, for some mysterious reason, he feels a great longing for her letters that day. The next day, Damien heads to the address he obtained, arriving at 52 Chronic Street. Although the address is correct, the place doesn't look like a prosthetic limb workshop at all. He decides to ring the bell but receives no reply. He discovers the door is open and enters cautiously while calling out to ask permission. As soon as he steps inside, he confirms he is in the right place, seeing a collection of prosthetic hands and feet displayed on a table. He calls again, explaining he came for a prosthetic arm fitting, but he still finds no reply. So he wanders in the large workshop calling louder. Suddenly, an angry voice comes from above, rebuking him that he should have left like any normal person as long as no one answered him. A white-haired man wearing glasses appears, looking very annoyed as he shouts in his face, asking why he woke him from his sleep. He continues his grumbling, explaining he hadn't slept for 3 consecutive days, and as soon as sleep overcame him, someone lacking the slightest degree of common sense appeared to disturb him. Damien asks him if he is Asher Ulan. He confirms his identity angrily and asks what he wants. Damien introduces himself calmly, explaining that Major Paul Jeska directed him to the place, and that he wishes to inquire about making an artificial arm. Asher Ulan's voice changes from anger to reluctant acceptance and invites Damien in first. Asher orders Damien to sit in a designated chair in his workshop and asks him to lift his arm to clearly reveal the amputation site. While Damien complies, Asher asks about the cause of his injury. Damien calmly replies he was hit by a hand grenade. Asher contemplates the matter for moments, before presenting him with a prosthetic arm and asking him to try wearing it first. Damien tries the prosthetic arm and finds it moves easily. Asher explains to him that this type is an active prosthetic capable of performing basic joint movements. Asher comments that this arm moves well and that it will help him adapt quickly to a more advanced prosthetic, the type that works with internal electrodes. This term piques Damien's curiosity, so he asks what it is. Asher is surprised that Damien came to him specifically without even knowing about this type of prosthetic, then proudly announces this is his specialty. He proceeds to explain that the internal electrode prosthetic is a robotic type, connecting electrodes directly to the nerves to receive signals and issue movement commands to the limb, working exactly as if the brain sends signals to move the arm naturally. Asher adds, this is a highly advanced product requiring the finest types of manufacturing, and it provides movement capability and ease of use exceeding merely being a real arm. This explanation pushes Damien to ask nervously about its cost. Asher tells him the price depends on the options, but usually starts from 300,000 herks. Damien is stunned by this exorbitant amount, realizing to himself that this equals his living expenses for nearly 10 full years. Damien hesitantly tells Asher he believes the ability to handle daily tasks will be enough for him. Accordingly, Asher suggests that the surface electrode prosthetic or the active limb would be a better choice. He recommends the surface type because it receives signals via a device connected to the skin's surface, and although it isn't at the same level as the internal type, it still allows him to live as he did before. Damien asks about its price. Asher tells him it is much cheaper, starting usually from 200,000 herks, which is still a shocking amount to Damien. Asher notices Damien's hesitation and asks if he doesn't have the money, affirming the price is indeed high, but it's definitely worth it. Then he tells him the prosthetic he wears now is the best choice for him, as it enables him to perform basic tasks. He reveals its price with a broad smile, which is 50,000 herks, noting it is much cheaper than the other options. Damien feels extreme frustration, wondering to himself if the value of his body is truly this small. He asks Asher if other workshops charge similar prices. Asher replies it is impossible. He proudly affirms that no other craftsman can match his technical skill. and his products cannot be obtained anywhere else. This is why the price is naturally high. Damien reluctantly understands. Damien curses Paul in secret, who introduced him to this skilled craftsman, realizing he isn't a wealthy noble like him who is indifferent to such amounts. Damien decides he will think about the matter and search elsewhere before returning, but Asher mocks his idea, affirming what he has is the best. Then he asks him to leave, expressing his confidence that he will inevitably return after trying the prosthetic he made. He bids him farewell, saying he will see him soon again. Damien leaves the workshop thinking he had no idea that artificial arms were this expensive. He decides for the time being to at least check the street of prosthetic workshops. Damien wanders the street, moving from one workshop to another, but doesn't find what he searches for. He sits exhausted, realizing there is no other place offering the same quality of prosthetics that Asher Ulan has. For although his prices were higher, the feeling was completely different from the moment he wore it. While other prosthetics caused him pain, Asher's limb was lightweight and easy to move. Damien sits on a bench feeling sorrow, thinking how even the active prosthetic was remarkably different. Imagining what it would be like if he owned a robotic limb capable of performing more precise movements. Damien stands up with a heart full of determination, deciding he will work with all his might to earn money and buy that advanced artificial arm. 2. While he begins his search, he spots a sign that says, "Staff wanted" to help move goods and perform other tasks. He decides he will manage with one arm for now, until he can save enough money. Whether he will buy a prosthetic from Asher or someone else, he is determined to get something better. He begins taking the job ads from the bulletin board, but his journey in searching for work is met with immediate and repeated refusal, as employers wonder about his ability to perform tasks with one arm, telling him in the end they cannot hire him. One employer rejects him with disdain, explaining the work requires strength and mocks the idea of hiring a one-armed man. One employer closes the door in Damien's face as frustration takes hold of him, grumbling at this bad luck. As evening falls, he stands alone facing his fate, and a wave of despair overwhelms him as he wonders what will happen if he cannot find a job at all.